1 year on from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the struggle goes on. Now, though many have fled through various refugee programs and links across the continent, some have headed the other way. 2 weeks ago, 16 Scots drove 9 crowd-funded jeeps over 1,500 miles to the west of the country to donate them to the Ukrainian army. Those Scots hail from all corners of the country, and Jen Stout, a journalist from Shetland, was in one of the jeeps. She brings us this week's Reporter's Notebook.
That week marking 1 year since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was, in Edinburgh at least, a busy one. A demonstration down the Royal Mile, speeches, packed-out concerts. And if you were one of those marching against Russian aggression that weekend, you might have spotted the jeeps, decked out in blue and yellow, leading the procession. This convoy set off for the Newcastle ferry the next day, crowd-funded jeeps destined for the front lines in Ukraine. I'd asked if I could help drive. A good way to get back to Ukraine, I thought. Beats flying. Our group included musician Dominic Harris, one of the driving forces behind Jeeps for Peace, businessman Stuart Ford, who is another, along with priests from St John's and St Salvador's Episcopal churches, some Aussies and Ukrainians, and one remarkable South African artist. In fact, they were all remarkable in their own way, as people tend to be. You just have to spend long hours in a pickup truck with them to find out. As for the jeeps, they're mostly big black L200s and Warriors, the mainstay of farms up and down the land. The campaign has taken more than 30 such vehicles across to Ukraine now, relying on donors big and small. The reason they do it is simple. They want to help. Jeeps are desperately needed on the front to transport wounded and supplies. And British second-hand jeeps are cheap because they're right-hand drives and less desirable as exports. Behind the scenes, a never-ending bureaucratic nightmare goes on. Papers for the vehicles and tickets and insurance, none of which I'm privy to. I just have to drive the thing. Mine is nicknamed Vinny, and he is muddy and fun to drive. First stop with my South African co-driver, Mary-Ann, is the ferry to Amsterdam. There's something proper about leaving by sea, something I appreciate deeply. We slip down the muddy Tyne, past the pretty fishing harbour at North Shields and the lighthouse at the end of its long pier. The morning brings a grey and rainy Holland, and we start early, aiming to cross into Poland before midnight. One small hitch with farm vehicles is that they've spent their lives driving a few miles at a time. After the 1,000th mile, Vinny is flagging, or rather, steaming. Late at night, still in Germany, we're pulling over every 10 minutes, letting the engines spit and cool down on the hard shoulder. It's bitterly cold. Luckily, I'm with someone who knows how to laugh in these situations. We finally limp over the Polish border at 15 miles an hour and pull up with great relief at the motel, where kind women are still serving cabbage rolls and pork stew. The next day, abandoning Vinny to be repaired later, I drive with priests Marcus and Ross, and we enjoy the beauty of a 6 a.m. sunrise in a cloudless sky to the soundtrack of Scottish band Nightworks. This particular Jeep leaks diesel dramatically at each petrol station, but it's not terminal. There's a nervousness always among people as you approach the Ukrainian border. Something difficult to explain back home is that normal life continues in Ukraine. There are bored truck drivers waiting in a queue on the Ukrainian side, just as there are on the Polish side. Petty bureaucracy is still in force, like the long delays over a misspelled surname. And in Lviv, or indeed in the small western town that we end up in, there are bars and cafes and squabbling couples and giggling teenagers, people worrying about rent and people making too much money from rent. In short, all the things that make up life. And that can be hard to see from afar. Naturally, the worst news and pictures make it to TV. Once across the border, though, met by Ukrainian hospitality, everyone relaxes. The next night is a big party at our host's place. Local musicians playing amazing instruments like the trembita, a wooden mountain horn several metres long, and the dulcimer-like cymbali. Most of our group are heading home, but one, my co-driver Mary-Ann, stays on for a few weeks. What brought her here is an extraordinary story in itself. With charity Space Art Scotland, she ran a crowdfunder for art therapy supplies, which began in Scottish prisons. She's here to find out what's needed, what's possible, how best she can help. The experience seems to have a huge effect on her, but I think it does on everyone involved. They'll be doing it all again soon. Perhaps you want to volunteer. Mechanics and those with a sense of humour particularly welcome. In Kramatorsk, near the front lines a few weeks later, I speak to soldiers Dmitry and Vasily, who've just got one of the vehicles. Thank God people are helping, they say. Dmitry notes approvingly that the jeeps are fast, and that's good. Soldiers always need to be moving faster. How many do you need, ideally? I ask. He puffs out his cheeks, shrugs. 1,000.
And that is Jane Stout's Reporter's Notebook for this week.